Hello everyone. My name is Pian Pian, founder and CEO of Amotions. Amotions is a platform to help managers and teams improve connections and productivity by upskilling them with AI-powered coaching and upskilling. Today, we are very happy to have Oneka here. Oneka has been a talent development, organization and development leader at various companies, and he has been in this field for over 20 years. And she has a lot of expertise and also in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are so happy to have you here today, Oneka. Thank you so much.
Pian Pian, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Is there anything else you would like to add to your self-introduction?
I say let's just jump in. I'm excited about the conversation and to talk a little bit about, right, how do we bring, you mentioned, the different areas and disciplines that I've worked in across the people and talent space. And there are there's no shortage of ideas and theories. What I think a lot of people are looking for are solutions and some things that work. So happy to share, my perspective, what I've seen work, what I've seen gain traction and drive engagement. So happy to share a little bit of that with you today.
Thank you. Yeah. We like to keep it as a conversation. So that's great. Some of the common questions I have heard from leaders, for example, including like, how do I cultivate an inclusive team? So I'm curious from your experience working with different organizations, like what are the good practices they have seen from PwC or other companies?
Yeah, building an inclusive environment is really about, quite honestly, doing a lot of listening, right? Regardless of the industry, regardless of the culture of the organization, regardless of the segment of the staff population or associate population, at the end of the day, people want to know and feel honored. They want to feel seen.
Right.
They want to be valued. And what I love about the word inclusion is it implies the goal that people want to be included. And what that really allows leaders and executives as they think about the culture of their organization is, how do we bring all or as many of the voices of our people into the conversation about what inclusivity and inclusion looks, feels, and sounds like, right? I think sometimes we think of it as actions, but it's also really about thoughtful intention, right? Being and having everyone at the table together is always a good and the right gesture. Even more thought and intention goes into when I extend the invitation to these different people and unique voices. Am I being thoughtful and intentional about how I extend the invitation and why, right? Because there are so many different lived experiences that we don't want to generalize, but we do want to let everyone know that they are welcome to bring who they are, their thoughts, again, their lived experiences, not just to the table and to the organizational culture, but you asked a question specifically about teams. And when I think about the word team, I think about people for sure that are coming together with a common goal, common objectives, a desire for common complementary outcomes. But more important, when I think about it, what I tell leaders is to think about your team literally as you would any other sport. No, there are specific and discrete positions and roles that people on a team play. And those roles and positions sometimes have unique skills. The skills are complementary, the skills supplement the need or the aspiration, the goal or the objective of the team. And so you want to think of it that way, because no two players on a team necessarily are tasked with the exact same role, right? Some are playing defensively, some are playing offensively, right. Some are playing strategically, some are playing tactically. If you think about your team and the people and the unique skills that they bring, it's really helpful to think of it through that lens as well. Because every contribution is valuable, every contribution is unique, and most importantly, every contribution will not be the same. So I think it's really about how do we encourage leaders before they talk about inclusion,
Mhm.
listen for what inclusion means to the people on their team, in their function, and in their organization, because they will help you define it based upon what it means to them.
That's a good point. So it's like inclusion means different things for different people, and the step one is to listen to especially the people in the team, to see what they prefer and what inclusion means for them, and what their preferences and styles are, and go from there.
Most definitely, as working with some clients over the last couple of years, we started to see what I call the evolution, right, of the DEI
Mhm.
conversation, moving more towards what we now call DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
You may see diversity, equity, inclusion, and adoption, right? So you may see more DEIA,
Mhm.
adoption and or advocacy, right? What does it mean to be an advocate for diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures and environments? And there are some that even have changed it to be around justice, right? So how do we think about justice? What they often call JEDI, justice,
Mhm.
equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the the sequence of the letters, to me, for me, are not as important as the intention behind them,
Mm.
right? Some organizations may explore the domain of DEIB or DEIA or DEIJ, but the question for me is always to the heart of the matter. It's not about the what that you do. It's not about the how you do it. Those things
Mm.
are important. The main question is why. It's really important to understand why you're exploring this journey, because having a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of the adjacent acronyms, it's really about, are you ready to take this transformational change journey that will inevitably impact your culture? It will impact how you see leadership. It will
Mhm.
impact how you see your associates. And if and when it's done right and with intention and reflection, it will have you to look at your culture, step back and look at it and say, is this the culture, A, that we thought we had,
Mhm.
right? Is this the culture that we really have? And is this the culture that we want to have? Is this the
Right.
culture that we aspire to have, right? We see it in the media all the time. We see it, those of us that are on LinkedIn quite a lot and listening to other contributors and
Right.
people who share their experiences openly, that the culture that was communicated to them may not be the culture that they experienced, right? So there's the culture that's socialized, and then there's the culture that's realized, what people actually experience. And so as organizational and cultural leaders are exploring what the future of their culture looks like through a DEI lens,
Mm.
it's really important to be able and willing to look at it across all those dimensions: who we think we are, who we really are, and who we want to be,
Mm.
right? Because those views are often very different. The reality that people within an organization or even on a team experience can be very different. And it is so critical to understand the role that first line leaders, people leaders play
Mm.
in how staff and associates experience organizational culture and a sense of belonging, right? Every organization has what I call macro and then subcultures, right? So there's the culture of the organization overall, what it aspires to be. But that looks very different depending upon your people leader and your experience and their experience and how they navigate and build relationship within the teams and people that they lead. So it's really important to think through a lot of these different dimensions as you explore what inclusion means for us, how we want to define it, and then what are the behaviors that we commit, right, to demonstrating, and then the most important piece, and what types of accountability are we going to hold ourselves and others to when these behaviors are present, and
Right.
even more importantly, when they are not.
Yeah. I mean, as minorities and women, like what if not just minorities and women, but could be other kinds of people who encounter biases or even kind of discrimination in the workplace or settings, like what kind of actions do you suggest someone can take to handle that situation?
That's a very, very sensitive response. The reality of it is
Yeah.
it depends, right? You mentioned when somebody, experiences bias. I think it's really important to understand that we all have biases, right?
Mm.
Literally every human being does. And sometimes I believe there's a notion that, our biases can be removed.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of it is that's not something that we can necessarily train away. You can't train away a bias, but what you can do is help inform people and create awareness that a bias exists so that they can make better informed decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Knowing that that bias may be there,
Right.
right? And that requires a level of transparency. It requires a level of EQ, right? When we think about emotional intelligence, to be able to say, you know what, I may have a blind spot here, right? Based upon my lived experience or things
Right.
that have happened to me or assumptions that I may be making internally. Those become great opportunities to invite others into the conversation who have a different perspective than you.
Mm-hmm.
We are living in a time where I've seen research just this week that there continues to be churn in organizations and in companies, and while there has been a great deal of attrition and churn and burn, right, as people are experiencing layoffs across a number of big organizations,
Right.
not just in tech but outside of tech. But what we're also seeing is that people are opting to also leave organizations where the culture, the work ethic,
Right.
not healthy. We're starting to hear more about the impact of toxic culture.
Yes.
And so when we talk about people experiencing bias, when we talk about people experiencing micro or macro aggressions in the workplace,
Yeah.
when we talk about people feeling othered in the workspace, not only not included, but not having a sense of belonging.
Right.
I'm going to talk about belonging in a minute, but when those things are at play, it's nuanced. It is very nuanced. We tend to think of diversity in a very linear way. We tend to think of it around color and ethnicity, aligning it to people groups. But the spectrum of diversity is so much broader than that. There are people that experience bias because of their age.
Yeah.
There are people that experience bias in the workplace because they may have a neurodivergence.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or a disability, or lack of accessibility, things of that nature, where people don't always feel psychologically safe.
That's right.
To self-advocate for themselves and what they need, or having an environment that's healthy enough to speak with a team member, a peer, a colleague, a leader, and say, I would really like to talk about a behavior, something that was said, something that was done or not done, and how it's impacted me. I don't know that we always understand the level of courage that takes.
What suggestions do you have people when they're the person experiencing some of these aggressions, for example?
Yeah. One of the things that we find is that, and I'm going to use disability as one of those dimensions. One of the reasons that it is so challenging to report, right, when there are aggressions or lack of sensitivity in the workplace, is because over 75% of people that may have what they consider invisible disabilities or accessibility needs do not self-disclose. So for those of us, if you think about when you fill out a job application and there's always this section about, do you want to disclose, a medical, mental, emotional need or disability? There are people that actually opt not to because they do not want to have less opportunity. They don't want to necessarily disclose that because it limits them. Those can be seen as career limiting disclosures. So people often carry those challenges in silence. There are also people that make those needs known, and when they do, they're met with resistance, or they may be met with ignorance, somebody who may not be aware or know about the impact that an invisible or even a visible disability plays on somebody's ability to deliver and produce their best work. And so when you're met with that kind of tension, it can be quite challenging, because we're talking about somebody's livelihood, their ability to, to drive compensation, take care of their family, take care of themselves. And so many times people are faced with the conundrum of, do I escalate? Do I expose? Do I risk being further othered, right? Do I further risk, being earmarked as a troublemaker or high maintenance, or, there's always a situation, or do they suffer in silence? And what I find is that more people suffer in silence. People that do report, first of all, are extremely courageous, right? And they are willing to advocate for themselves and to make it better for those that come behind them. But what I often say is, it is always best to start the conversation with those that you are in proximity with and that you partner with most closely. So that's your people leader. It may be with peers or colleagues, if that's where you are having dynamics in the relationship. But it's always a challenge. It's always important, if you are in a situation that is uncomfortable, is not allowing you to produce or do your best work. It's also important to document, so that should you need to advocate for yourself through a more formal process, that you have incidences and you have the opportunity to show and share when, where, how, and who was involved in the situation. And so if you think about that alone, right, that's exhausting. That's so much to remember and recall, but quite often people in those situations, those are the very steps that they have to go through to make sure that they can be in an environment where they are received. And the challenge with that is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, psychological safety. Any and all of these recommendations, Kim, they are so difficult to do if there is not some level of psychological safety present.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes that safety is with an individual. Sometimes it is within a small team or a small cohort of people. In silence, or they leave. And that's what we're starting to see. I wanted to come back to the word belonging. One of the reasons that I focus on when I'm talking with clients and other leaders is the importance of bringing the word belonging into the conversation, because there's a delineation to be made, right? You may be focused on diversity, creating a diverse workforce, unique skills, talent, all of those things. You may also aspire to deal with and treat people equitably, right? As well as including all people, including all voices. But what I will say is somebody who is what many might consider a minority people group, but globally it's part of the majority people group, right? And color. The reality of it is, because you include me and invite me doesn't mean that I belong, or I feel that I belong. Belonging is often an internal mechanism.
The feeling.
It is a feeling. So when there are policies that are equitable, when there is fair and consistent treatment, right, of people across the organization in a way that is safe and does not attack their humanity, their lived experience, their faith choices, things of that nature. What that does is it implies and it creates a sense of belonging for me, right? I often say, because you invite me to the party, yes, you have included me. But when you invite me to dance, or you play music that I like and you say, hey, we knew you were coming, Oneka. And so we know that you like jazz. So you know what? We're going to play some jazz. That becomes, not only were they intentional about inviting me, but they thought about me in the design of this experience. And as a byproduct of that, I feel like I belong.
Right.
And so I think that's an important delineation to make.
So it's not just gesture, but actually think think about it and kind of see what the personal preferences are and consider it
Yeah. And
when
let's think
we're
about that, right? If you think about any relationship, you learn about another's preferences by studying them. It's by your observation. It's by asking thoughtful questions. It's by, again, giving them room to open up and share and disclose,
right.
right, what those likes are, what those
Yep.
loves are, what those hobbies are, whatever those different things that make us beautiful tapestries, right?
Mhm.
Because no two people, let alone two people groups, are a monolith,
That's right.
right? It would be really wrong and very, it would be a huge and broad assumption for me to say, as someone of Asian or Asian American descent, that if I ask you, Pian Pian, to represent, right, and say, well, what do all people of your your ethnicity group, what do you all like? What do you all eat for lunch? What do you? And you'll say, well, wait a minute, that is so varied and so vast.
Yeah.
And it's the same for everyone else, right? No people group is a monolith.
No, no
Black
two
and brown
people are
people,
the same.
no two people are the same, right? And
Right.
so
Yeah.
how do you open up space where people can bring that uniqueness?
Hmm.
And it's not just tolerated in the space,
Yeah.
but it's accelerated in the space. That's what
It,
produces.
it's yeah, it's a good point. I mean, kind of
Yeah.
segue into, so the how is also some, like, we're trying to figure out that as
Yeah.
well. Like, how do we make sure voices of people who are marginalized are heard, and then also in, like, especially in the hybrid remote environment, how do we build and cultivate a kind of trust and relationship to get to know one another, get to know one another, each other, and then making sure everyone feel the belonging. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I, having come from a management consulting background, there have been, management consulting firms, right, have been using hybrid or virtual work
Mhm.
models for the last 2 or 3 decades, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So there are some industries, there are some workplaces
Yeah.
that this has been their model for quite some
Hmm.
time. It is their baseline model.
Hmm.
And what I have found interesting is that over the last several years, right, nobody could anticipate a global pandemic and how it would literally shift,
Right.
right, workplaces.
Hmm.
But what I will offer is that when there is a question or a concern about building deeper relationships, some of the deepest relationships that I had, and this is not theory, it's lived
Yeah.
experience, right? Some of the deepest relationships and partnerships that I had with people that either worked with me or for me were people that are literally across the globe, whether they are in the Philippines, whether they are in India, whether they are across North America. These
Hmm.
may be people that I never shared a room with,
Mm.
but we built relationship through virtual
Mm.
conversation, through spending time, not just talking about the work, but
Yeah.
talking to each other. So what I offer is that we take it at its simplest form,
Hmm.
and while we have to work through the machination sometimes of scheduling and availability
Right.
and time zones and capacity and things of that
Yeah.
nature, at the end of the day, Pian Pian, we are talking about two human beings, much like we are right now.
Yes. Right.
We have not met in person, but we've had conversations. We've had an opportunity to
Hmm.
share experiences, to share challenges,
Right.
and to use that to create a deeper connection. So I don't believe that it's impossible. What I do agree, though, is that it
Mm.
requires work and it
Mm.
requires time and it requires consistency.
Yeah.
So what I would offer to people leaders that are leading virtual or remote teams
Hmm.
is to schedule time to connect with people on your team.
Hmm.
And when I've led teams that, again, were either globally dispersed or nationally dispersed, different geographies and the like, we spent our time together in two ways. We had team meetings, what I call more like a town hall, that
Hmm.
everyone's together. It was our opportunity to share all of the goings on and what's happening about the work.
Hmm.
But I also scheduled one-on-one time with each of them to check in on them as an individual. And it's not an either or, it really is both. One of the things that I actually did was say, you know what, everything that has to do with work, let's bring it into those all hands meetings, those all team meetings, so that If you have a need, a question, a problem, you need support, let's share that amongst all of us, because you don't know where that help may come from. It might come from me, but it might come from a peer or a colleague. They may have information or insight to share.
Mhm.
So that when we do meet together, that's our one-on-one time, and it's all about you. And what I also offer is I don't come to those meetings with agendas.
Mhm.
I allow my direct report or the person on my team to drive the agenda. What do you want to spend this time focusing on? What hurdles can I clear for you? How are the relationships going with your clients and customers? How is your family doing? Right? How are things going for you individually? Are you okay? Are you really okay?
Mhm.
And then I listen. The pandemic has presented challenges,
Right.
but I will also reframe and offer that it has provided us a gift. And my thought about that is, if you think about how we are all operating virtually,
Yeah.
all intents and purposes, we're having this conversation, and Pian Pian, I've invited you into my home. You are in my home office. You are in my space with my family, with my pets, part of my life, so to speak. And so that implies a level of intimacy and relationship.
Yeah.
Right? And
Exactly.
so what we're having to now learn and navigate is that wall and that barrier, false or simulated though it might have been, between work and life and family and individual and team. A lot of those barriers are torn down.
Right.
And I see that as a gift, because it gives you the opportunity to not just see the people on your team as contributors or the person responsible for this process, this client, this portfolio, but you get to see them as an individual. You get a chance to listen. And I think sometimes as leaders, sometimes we think we have to have all the answers. Sometimes it's not about the answers. Sometimes it's about, are you willing to ask the questions? And
Mhm.
some of the answers to those questions are, I don't know, but I commit to find out, right? Or I commit to help. Or how about I'll just listen and give you room
Mhm.
to solution and find and discover, and then communicate to me what's right for you
Right.
in this scenario, right? So it's a shared responsibility. It's not, it doesn't sit squarely in the lap of leaders, and it doesn't only sit squarely in the lap of team members
Right.
and associates, right? It's a jointly owned prospect, because again, it's relationship. And if we move toward relationship versus the task or the activity or the process, people feel included. People feel like they belong. They feel like they have autonomy. They feel empowered. They feel
Mhm.
equipped. And so that's what you want. You don't want people to feel as if they are being, constrained or restrained by what they can do and how they feel. You just leave room to sit
What?
with them.
So you mentioned it takes work and need to carve out time and
Yeah.
scheduling and all those. I mean, time is a very often I heard is a constraint. Like people are so busy with all kinds of things going on. They have to do sometimes even have to do their own individual contributor work. Sometimes they have all kinds of projects and initiatives going on.
Yeah.
What suggestions do you have for people to how much time they should carve out to do like one-on-ones with people in order to get to know them?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Again, when I sit in that seat as a people leader,
Mhm.
I allow my team member to drive that. My question is always, how often would you like to meet? I had some, especially those that might have been newer in their career. Hey, I want to
Mhm.
meet every week. I'd like to run some things by you, or I'd like to just
Mhm.
check in. Those that may be more tenured, more seasoned, prefer more autonomy.
Mhm.
Hey, we can check in once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. I'll let you know where things are. I'll make sure that I keep you updated on things that require your attention
Mhm.
via email, things of that nature. And then the time together is less frequent,
Mhm.
but still is enriching, right? I don't make the assumption, and I don't treat my approach to that as cookie cutter.
Mm.
I also ask my team members, okay, do you want to do Zoom? Do you want to just do a phone call? Do you want to send me your status and an update by email? And then we reply, and then we jump on a call just to lock down decisions.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things that also came up and emerged over these last several years as a result of the pandemic, we're literally on a Zoom meeting right now.
Mhm.
And there is so much cognitive overload that happens going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, right?
Yeah.
here's the thing, whether it's a Zoom meeting or a phone call, meetings back to back are an energy drain, and it becomes very, very difficult to focus.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I have some executive leadership coaching clients that I say, one of the biggest things that you can master is time and energy management.
Right. Yeah.
And use that to inform how you schedule, how you open access to your time. Knowing, if you're a morning person, then maybe that's the time to have all of your really important meetings. Maybe you use the afternoons for deep thinking work, or you use the afternoon time for one-on-ones because you're more accessible, right? You're more available. Or it may be vice versa.
Yeah.
One of the things that I also stopped doing, we would do things called a calendar cleanse. After about 3 to 6 months, if there were recurring meetings on my calendar, I declined them all and started with a fresh slate.
Oh.
And I did that because, let's be clear, right? I think sometimes, not even sometimes, probably 50% of meetings that are had are not as productive and don't drive the outcomes that we want. These are meetings that could have been a quick 5-minute phone call to gain clarity. It could have been an email to provide a summary and to inform someone, versus using meeting time as a collaborative time and space to bring people together to problem solve or troubleshoot and make finalized decisions and make sure that all voices are heard. So using your time and sort of mastering your calendar as a leader is really, really important, and making sure that you're not just giving time, but you're giving energy. Because here's the thing, there are going to be times, and as a CEO, I know you'll get this, and having a family and a life, there are going to be things that happen where you have time, but you don't have the energy. Right? There will be times when you have the energy, but you don't have the time. Right. So being able to master both of those continuum are really, really important. And it's no different than how we think about our family and that balance than it is with our work and the balance.
What tips do you have for time and energy management? It's a big thing.
It is. So if anybody were to look at my Outlook calendar, you would see that I schedule everything. So if it's time where I'm not taking any meetings, I block it. This is heads down time, right? I block it if I'm doing research for a keynote that I'm working on, or that I'm going to spend some time prepping for a client. I literally schedule it. I schedule it during the time of day or the week when I am going to be most available to be fully invested in that. So that's the first thing. Second is I look at time as currency, right? If you think about it, time is the only thing we don't get back, right? You make more money, but your real currency is time, right? This hour that we're speaking, that we're spending together, neither of us will ever get this time back. Right? So let's treat it as the precious commodity that it is. So when we talk about meetings, one of the things I also stopped doing was, not every meeting requires an hour, but guess what? If you give it an hour, it will consume an hour. So if we get better at being better practitioners of using our time, you know what? Most meetings I schedule for 30 minutes because it allows us to get very succinct. It drives me to be very clear about the intention, the agenda, and the outcomes that I need. Right? I equip whoever's coming to that meeting with whatever pre-read or information that they need to come to that meeting informed. I love to be able to say, you know what? Let me give you back 10 or 15 minutes of this meeting. We thought it would take 30. It took 15. Let me give you back the gift of time. I'm sure that you can use it for something else. Or how about even better, nothing else, just to kind of decompress for a minute. So thinking intentionally about how to best use your time. I have an anecdote, and I shared this with other clients. Really, really important meetings and things of that nature, I don't schedule them on Mondays or Fridays. Mondays, everybody's fire drilling and trying to get back into the swing of the week and clearing their inbox and prioritizing their time. And on Fridays, nobody cares. Right? So how do I, schedule those really, really important things where I want to need people's attention on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday? Because that also leaves room for people to do the same. And that's really important for leaders. I was working with a coaching client. I said, your team will model your behaviors. So if you are responding to their emails at 3 or 4 a.m., there's an invisible message that there's an expectation of working around the clock. Right. So if you're doing that, we have tools now where you can, if you work night owl and you're getting a thought, and that may be something that you do for you, you can schedule that email to not hit somebody's inbox till 8, 9, 10 in the morning. Right. Yeah. And so when you do that and we operate that way, we are inviting the people that we lead and that work with us and for us to mirror and mimic those same behaviors. And
Yeah.
so it's about protecting your time. If you want your team members to make sure that they live a balanced life that includes their family and time away and their mental and emotional health and wellness, model that behavior. Make sure that you're signing off and that you're spending time with your family, that you're taking care of yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? Because
Yeah.
many times what we find is that people will model what we do, not what we say.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you started talking about how to have people managers, the leaders, to have certain behaviors so that other people can model afterward. And how do you get managers to model the behaviors of, for example, like diversity, equity, and belonging as well, besides like managing time and energy well?
Most definitely. I think for a lot of leaders, and what I've seen more organizations do, is start to build a more balanced way of what they consider leadership success.
Mhm.
Many times when you think of whether that's performance management or how
Yeah.
we give feedback to leaders and things of that nature, what you give feedback to, what you measure and track gets done.
Right.
So it's really important that it becomes almost this balanced scorecard, this balanced view of this leader's capabilities and behaviors and the outcomes and results that those behaviors drive.
Right.
So it's great if you have a leader that has an extremely productive team. That team kicks butt every quarter. But the question is, are they leaving? Is everybody bloody, right? Is everybody burnt out?
Right.
They made the quota, right? The sales target was hit.
Yeah.
But if morale is low, if quality is low, if you have people that are having to take a lot of sick time and away time because the work environment is so mentally and emotionally draining, you still consider that a successful leader, right?
Yeah.
All those results, a result of or at the mercy of the health, the wellness, the productivity, and the quality of the team.
Yeah. So defining like success, what
You've got to
success
define
means.
what success looks like.
Yeah.
Some organizations, as we think about DEIB, are now taking it down to the people leader, or what they may call them people managers levels, in that you may be amazing on paper and the metrics and all of that feedback tells us that you are producing or exceeding expectations around production. But we also want to measure team engagement. How engaged are your people? Right? Are the people that are a part of your team, are they getting opportunities? Are they being developed? Are they having the opportunity to explore different or special roles and projects? Right? Are you working with them to understand what their aspirational leadership roadmap looks like, and then paving a way and working with them to get there? So they're starting to look at that. They're starting to look at how employee satisfaction data, can they look at that down to the function and the people or team leader level to see where there may be hot spots, where there may be a need to support the leader? And let's be clear, it may not be something that the leader is intentionally doing. It may be that they are so burdened with work that they've had to, or felt like they had to, sacrifice the relationship and taking care of the people side of their teaming. And that's really, really important, because if we think about the last 3 or 4 years, people are coming back into work. They're having to resume with, more intense workloads. You have smaller teams that have to produce the same amount of work or more with less people. You have people that have made it through a reduction in force, right? And they're still there, but they're dealing with the survivor's remorse of that.
Right.
And they're having to consume now the work of 2 or 3 people.
That's right.
Not easy, right? So all of these dynamics are at play. And now more than ever, we are hearing and seeing where people leaders, HR leaders, and executives and decision makers are grappling with, how do we now factor in mental health? How do we factor in emotional well-being into this equation of what it looks like to be a thriving culture and organization? So some of this is uncharted territory. we could beg to say, well, gosh, it shouldn't, because human beings are in the workplace, right? We're still talking about human beings. But the reality of it is, I think, the veil was torn a little bit as a result of the pandemic, of, again, that line of demarcation between work and life, right? It's not work and life, it's just life. And it's the part of our life that includes our family or our personal development or work. It's all life, right? And so now the workplace is having to define and design with the whole person in mind. And as a result of that, those that are leading others are having to build, for some, new muscle around what it looks like to lead teams.
It's not.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So it's not just finishing of 1 or 2 projects, like not short term, but how do we make sure the organization is going to progress long term, and that for that is also how to make sure the people are at the best and feel the best and can also be doing their best. So
yeah, and I don't want to oversimplify, right? It's not always easy. Because it is so individual. And that's why my first de facto answer is always err on the side of more listening than talking, right? Whether that's at the executive level, wanting to understand what is our culture, what do we want it to be, what do we aspire for it to be, what is the reality? You find out by listening. If you have people leaders that are struggling to build engaged and collaborative teams, you get the data to support your solutions or what you need to do by listening, right? People leaders who want to build teams that are collaborative and engaged and psychologically safe, you do that by listening.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Oneka. This is very helpful, and it's very engaging and kind of inspiring conversation. So thank you so much for sharing all your experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Different organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.